Welcome. Kicking off Oregon here. A new state here on the West Coast. Funny thing about Oregon, I've spent plenty of time here. I think of all the places that I've come across in this country, they have the strangest pronunciations of words for geographical locations. So I'm bound to get a bunch of them wrong. But I will do my damnedest. Skipping through the early preliminary sheets here, the architecture sheets. I love these old style, these early days of the survey. The handwritten ones and the hand-drawn ones, they just have such, just a different type of person, Just a different era of people that we were making then. Everything from just the little handwritten notes to the little stylistic flares. Now, the ones that you get are so clinical off the later batch of the survey. But these early days, they're a lot more fun. And just aesthetically pleasing. And sometimes a little bit more honest, too. Going through these, it looks like we have a bunch of wooden structures coming up, which is a little odd. Usually we are bombarded with brick and stone, and then industry and dilapidation and bridges and all sorts of other things like this. And perhaps we'll get there, I don't know. Perhaps we'll get there. Impossible to say. Well, I'm excited about that. There we go, some brick. I might have known if I can call it, brick coming up here, brick everywhere. How's everybody doing? How are my levels, Jimmy? In a minute here. Got a new setup here for the little temporary setup here. Alright, let's get off to the jump here. First step. This little quintessential little American little home here, looking rather beautiful, looking like a common sight that you see in the beautiful American Pacific Northwest. I wish that things were managed differently there, because it is a beautiful area. Just way too many weird happenings for my taste these days. Anyway, you need to make sure I'm human, do you? Kind of like that. Going to computer tries to figure out if you're a human. I should be figuring out if you're a human, and you're not. You fail, not me, robot. Okay. This beautiful little home here is the James C. Tolman House. It is in Ashland. It is in Jackson County. And Mr. Tolman, we're told, very limited, but he was the county judge and later the surveyor general of Oregon. His home was a noted center of hospitality. It's a typical farm home. In fact, the land is still being farmed at the time of this writing, which is in our past. Thanks. Notification I don't want. And that is the extent of the data that we are given. We are told it was built in the late 1850s by local pioneer mechanics. That's right. And that's it. Well, actually, this is part of it as well. And actually, look at that. What a weird foundation. A little brick stuff going on over here, a little brick. Where's my arrows? I haven't done those in a while. Look at that brick right there. Just look at it. Brick right there. And there's some rubble here. It's an interesting way to do that, different types of building material. I'm not saying it means anything. It's saying doesn't mean anything. Just an observation, all right? Just a data point for you to consider, okay? Next up, we got the J&T Miller House. This is on Old Stage Road, also in Jacksonville, or at least the Jacksonville vicinity in Jackson County. And if this one we're told, simply, it's a 1.5 story, built in the mid-19th century. And that's it. This photo is from 1971, and this is all, I believe, in the rather historic area of Jacksonville. There's another one called the Moore House. These very pleasant-looking American homes starting out this way. Not too often does a survey start out with just regular homes. This is a frame home with clapboarding, 1 story, and you can tell it's got a 1-bay segmental arched entrance porch here with what looks like some lattice work. And that's basically it. It was built in 1878, and it's on 3rd Street. This beauty is the McCulley House. I like these little statue guys, with the light. It's like a railroad worker with a light. My grandpa had one in his cabin. I feel like these were very common. I wonder what was the deal with that? Was it just a trend? Like a lawn gnome thing, or what? I remember one day some hooligans threw a rock at his nose and chipped his nose, and I was horrified as a youngster. Who would do such a thing? Anyway, this here McCulley House, not only is it quite the looker, but we are told it was built for James McCulley, who was a local entrepreneur. He erected one of Jacksonville's first brick store buildings, but not this one. Moving on, light on information. This is a very pleasant stroll through Americana-looking homes. I wonder if this is the first survey we're going to get where it's just historic niceties instead of bizarre narratives. Could it be? Is Oregon the outlier? I doubt it, but stay tuned and find out. This is on California Street, also in Jackson. This here is the Magruder House, built in 1870 or 1880. This is part of the historic district here. And just one picture each, huh? Just one picture of these early days. And that's all we're getting. This is the Love House, we're told. Oh, clearly it's an antique store now. This is also on 3rd Street. And this here is a, built 1867. That's all you get, folks. Just a little nice, pleasant stroll down through Americana land. This tall, lofty gentleman is the Klippel House, or Klippel, I suppose it could be. Yeah, I don't know. Built mid-19th century, and that's all we're told. Okay, what are we building up to here? It's very interesting how the early days of the survey really weren't not about much narrative stuff. Like, seemed to come later. In the beginning, it seems like they were just literally taking pictures of the old stuff and not being invasive and not trying to sell you on too much. Maybe it'll stay this way the whole time. That'd be refreshing. This is the Robert Reuter House, and we are told it was built in the late 19th century. None of these have any attempt to, assign an architect to it or a backstory. Why? Because none's needed. It's a house that makes sense, an area that makes sense with materials that make sense. You know, it's only when you get into the outlandish stuff that suddenly you need to invent architects and all sorts of weird nonsense. This is the William Kaler House, and we're still in Jacksonville, I reckon, be here in some time. And this here was built in the late 19th century, just like the rest. This one, I don't think there's ever been a more pleasing start to a survey in my limited experience. This is the Savage House, and this one here was built by one of the early pioneers of Oregon, designed for family needs at the time. Later it was enlarged and partly rebuilt. The lumber and timbers are hand-wrought. The design is picturesque. It was built by John Cyphers in 1860. The next owner, Charles Savage, added on a 1.5-story portion. There'll be more on Mr. Savage later, I said in a bit of foreshadowing. Frick off, Jimmy. Let's see. This in here doesn't have a name. It's just 325 6th Street House. White picket fences, notice. Built in 1880. No further information other than the fact that it is indeed a residence, which you probably could have guessed with your superb detective skills. This is the Helms House, and again, no attempt at telling us much more. It's just a regular house with Italianate details built in 1878. Also in Jacksonville, if you hadn't guessed by now. And this here is the Harris Chambers House, which is also on 3rd Street, also in Jacksonville. This one's got a bit of a backstory. We're told in 1856, Mary Ann Harris bought the lot. The house, which dates from that time, is simple. Miss Harris apparently bought the house after her husband was killed, and she moved to Jacksonville from her farm. According to local tradition, the Harris cabin was surrounded by Indians who killed her husband. Finding herself surrounded, Miss Harris determined to defend the house, firing at Indians from different windows to convince them that several persons were defending the place. After several hours, the Indians retreated, and Miss Harris and her daughter escaped into the brush country, where they spent the night. And the following day, a party of militia patrolling the road discovered the women and escorted them to Jacksonville. That is what we are told. Interesting that killed the husband, but didn't do anything else. I don't know, kind of a funny story. I suspect Miss Harris, maybe. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. Accuse someone of killing their spouse is pretty heavy. Abandoned your farm, huh? Hopefully at least you brought the rolling pin. This is the Harbaugh House, and this here was built in the mid-19th century, also in the Jacksonville Historic District. Funny, you just get one picture of each of these houses. I mean, you know, this is a very nice little stroll through. It seems very different from some of the surveys, and they always start out with low information in this earlier part of the surveys, but this one seems especially, innocent, which immediately makes me especially suspicious. This seems like the most honest segment of any of these surveys that we have ever experienced thus far. Oh, I'm being rate limited. Get your rate limit right here. The Gwynn House, built late 19th century. It was removed from its original location at the southeast corner of the courthouse lot, and it was originally used for an office for county officials. No telling why they moved a regular little office down the way to become someone's home. But they did, which leads us to the Jacksonville Historic District itself. Would you just look at it? And here we have the story, and it goes like this. In December of 1851, you have two prospectors from California who discovered gold here on Jackson Creek, James Cluggage and James Poole. 1852 is when they began their operations. Now at the time, California gold rush had brought prospectors north, and when miners from Southern Oregon arrived to reprovision, news of the Jackson Creek discovery spread quickly. So according to one account, there's a group of California miners who watched one of the drunken new arrivals, and after he secured his provisions, they followed him back to his camp in Oregon where 2 or 3 others were mining on the sly. So they went to work prospecting, and they find a rich creek, and then they told all their friends, and soon 1,000 miners from California had overrun the whole country. The old father drunk got back to his mine, huh? Cluggage and Poole claimed the land around the site of the discovery under the Donation Land Law of 1850, which gives 320 acres to every unmarried white settler over the age of 18 who is a citizen or, wanted to become a citizen. A married couple got twice the acreage of a single man, with half the land belonging to the wife. If you migrate to Oregon between December 1st, 1850 and December 1st, 1853, you could get half the amount allowed a territorial resident, as long as you cultivate that claim within 12 months, and that its boundaries conform to major compass points. So this town of Jacksonville is in the southwestern corner of Cluggage's Donation Land claim, where miners were already erecting tents, shanties, and first buildings. In 1853, it was the seat of the county after just being platted in 1852, 1 year later. So for 30 years, this place thrived as a mining town and then an agricultural settlement. From the 60s to the 80s, the 1860s to the 1880s, and it was about 800, 1,200 people originally, while Jackson County was only 8,000 people. And little information is available about the miners and farmers who formed the largest part of this population. Really, the only presence of miners was reflected in the amount of gold that they forwarded California through Beekman's Bank. And this probably is inaccurate, because some miners probably hoarded it or took it themselves without going through the bank, and some of it was probably kept in the community. But once the euphoria of the first discovery passed, the population of miners couldn't have been that large. And then, of course, you have local farmers to provide most of the miners' food. Some miners turned their attention to furnishing supplies, turning the gold into jewelry and watches. And as ever, one of the identifiable part of Jacksonville's population is a sizable group of Chinese immigrants who were brought under contract to work in the mines. Oftentimes, they were reworking claims that were abandoned by white miners. Some of them became prosperous enough to purchase property, like this guy named Hog Pit, and also Toy Singh. I'm not making those up. But they had excess cash and lent money for mortgages, and they were not allowed to operate property out of outside of a small area, which was known as Chinatown. And most did not prosper because of the discrimination reflected in the China poll, which was a tax which was 4 times the rate of normal county poll taxes. And so the Chinese usually only spent a few years here in Oregon, and most Chinese immigrants understandably returned to California. When the railroad came to town, they thought it would spur Jacksonville's growth, but the optimistic view was soon proved to be wrong. What a picture. Tells us so much. 1884, the line completed actually bypassed Jacksonville, and so they couldn't compete with business, and so their days of preeminence in the county were long over. And despite what you see here in some of these pictures, the town looking rather substantial, early official records don't really talk about the dwellings, so they assume that they're probably tents inhabited by bachelor miners, or circular mosque-like buildings made of shakes, lighted by the crevices of windows of cotton cloth. Whatever the hell that means. There's your little Oddfellows Lodge there, of course. I knew you'd be making an appearance. I might have known. Town was only 1 year in existence when the Methodist Church was built. We're told that the buildings are characteristic of Western architectural development. I guess I see some of that, but I definitely see a lot more of this sort of classic look sprinkled in, which doesn't seem to match these descriptions. We're told in the late 1850s, the town only started in 1853, so I don't understand why it's not that, it's basically the beginning. But either way, they're saying that finally substantial buildings started to appear in the late 1850s. Pretty substantial to me. But yeah, you got your usual, most of these buildings destroyed by fire, and they swore to rebuild back better in brick. It's not too different from what we see everywhere. Now, we're told it's remarkably preserved, at least it was in the 70s. Of the 30 brick buildings that were mentioned in the old articles, 28 remain today. By today, I mean 1971, so 50 years ago. But it paints an unusually complete illustration of the architectural development of 19th century Western mining and agricultural town. A little bit of snooze fest there. What can you do, What do you want from me? What do you want from me? Can't just be non-stop bangers, dude. Gotta have some mash in there, you know what I'm saying? What do we got here? This is the Chris Keegan House, also in Jacksonville. Built in mid-19th century. There's another look at it. The old City Hall. This is the old Jacksonville City Hall, which started out as a merchant store, I guess. But the history is very cloudy. No one knows if it was rebuilt or built this way to be a city hall, or torn down and rebuilt. And it was acquired eventually by the city and turned into the city hall, but no one knows because the minutes were destroyed. And it also operates as the firehouse. And A very muddied up history, but look, there's a bell. That's a good way to segue out of that. Look, a bell. The Jackson County Courthouse. Ladies and gentlemen. I think it is. Which now houses the Jacksonville Museum. During the early years of the development, the courthouse was any building that was temporarily used for holding court. So sometimes it was a church. Sometimes it was a sizable room rented from various officers, such as the Reverend T.F. Royal. Now, the first maps of the town indicate that the courthouse square would be north side of California Street, but it was actually never built there. Instead, the county and Warren Lodge number 10 of the accepted free and ancient Masons shared a building that stood on the lot, occupied by the present building. Barry and Kerr were the contractors. And of course, James Cluggage again deeded the land that the courthouse stood on. And in 1867, the Masons gave up their rights in the building because the county had been making numerous improvements. A stone vault, carpeting, general refinishing, new steps, fences, planting of young maple trees. But it wasn't until 1871 that it became officially the courthouse. It was also the county office, and it must have been very crowded because they also rented it to private lawyers. There's an article in 1871 from the Democratic Times which says this dilapidated old structure is a disgrace to the county. 5 years later, it is ordered by the court that the courthouse be erected in the town of Jacksonville, and the plans and specification for the erecting of said court be considered in an adjourned meeting of the court to be held at the usual place for holding said county court on Thursday, 17th of August, 1882, 10 o'clock a.m. of said day. G.E. Payne was appointed the architect, but his role seems to be secondary because the Board of Commissioners took charge, and they were to use stone from the Kanika Flats on the outskirts of town. And the cornerstone was laid June 23, 1883. Adam Schmidt's Bank provided music for the occasion. Adam Schmidt's Bank was a band. And Judge Day delivered an address. The cornerstone contained a number of items, including an upper set of artificial teeth by Will Jackson. So a number of items, but fake teeth are the only ones listed. And in August, the walls were finished, the tower was in place. March 1884, the building was finished, and all was well. Lamps were installed, desks were ordered, windows were hung, and matting was provided for the floors. And thusly, the building was used as a courthouse until 1927, until it became a museum, with clocks on the mantle. What a typical story for early America. And really, so far, this has just been the safest survey ever. Not a single thing out of sorts, it would appear. Just weird, weak stories. What are you gonna do, huh? Really, what are you gonna do? You ain't gonna do nothing. I tell you what. Now this here, I think. Wait a second. Make sure I'm giving you proper information. I'm not. Well, godly Bob howdy. This here is Judge and Noonan's saddlery. It was part of the Union Hotel lot until Mr. Beekman took title to the land in 1858. You remember Beekman the banker? Passed around for a few years. Value of the property rose 5 times. And eventually was sold back to Beekman. A bunch of ridiculous provisions in the deeds and privileges and constructing buildings and the splitting of the lot and all sorts of nonsense. Anyway, built in 1874, what they say. You know, a lot of these little histories are just full of little insignificant little titles and deeds and traded back and forth and agreements, and it's a little bit get a little lost in the minutiae of it all. And normally, you know, I'm a sucker for the details, but to have something sold and then resold and then sold and then sold and then sold again and then sold right back to you within a year, it's just, yeah, you just sort of lose me a little bit. And anyway, this is called the Rogue River Valley Electric Power Substation. It's the official title, although clearly it's just a visitor center. Now, it's built in 1905. It was originally, obviously, a power substation, and now it's just a visitor's information center. You can go get a road map. How about that? C.W. Kaler, gentleman we heard about earlier. Again, you have a series of deeds. Dr. Lewis Ganung, who sold it to Payne Page Prim lawyer. Then the land increased, and then maybe a building was constructed. And in 1868, the map shows a larger building. And then in 1864, and then in the 1860s, William Hoffman had his office in the building. And in the 1870s, it served a number of different purposes. Then in 1870, Mr. Beekman, again, shows up and renews his insurance policy on the bank building. And then they built a printing office, and then there was a shoe shop. You know, this is all one paragraph. And now I guess it's a law office. And all these things were allegedly built in 1870. Passed around between the same like 5 people. I don't know what to make of this place. What are these people, cartoons? Hey, I'm a lawyer. Hey, check it out over here. I'm a shoemaker. Oh, that's cool. Let's switch hats. Okay, cool. Now I'm making watches. Now I'm going to go and live in this building over here. I'm going to be a baker. Oh, really? That's cool. How long are you going to do that for? 2 months. I'm going to sell the building back to you, but only half of it. Okay. Well, in the front yard, I got to put a tortilla factory. That's cool because now I'm wearing this hat and I'm the judge. What kind of madness is going on here? And meanwhile, there's just Native Americans and Chinese people like looking at him like, What's going on with these guys? This is the Redmond's Lodge. Redmond being a prominent fraternal organization or secret, not so secret society. And the lot was normally known as the site of the New State Saloon, one of the longest operating businesses in Jacksonville. There's the usual nonsense of Mr. Peters buys the lot from James Cluggett for $250. 1 year later, sells to Mr. Thompson for $1,500. Then in 1857, William McLaughlin advertises New State Saloon, so Peters probably built a building there, but no one knows. And then there's suddenly an attorney's office over the New State Saloon. And suddenly there's a tailor shop on the second floor of the New State block. Then William McLaughlin, with Henry Clappell's partner, who shows back up, bought the saloon. Then Clappell was the owner. And then several people operated the saloon for Clappell, including his own former partner, McLaughlin, and Henry Pape. And then Clappell sold the saloon to Charles Savage, who shows back up. And he owned it till 1884, and then it was purchased by the Red Men. And then Savage took off one mortgage to pay off another. Then they rented the saloon to Webb and Jones, but they had the provision that Webb and Jones would need to accept liquor, which had been ordered by Savage, but it needed to be stored at John Bilger's store. And then in 1878, Manning and Webb operated the saloon until Savage took it into his own hands again in September 14th. Then he converted it to a boarding house, and that's just the beginning. It literally keeps going on for another 3 or 4 pages about it. Then the Pocahontas Tribe No. 1 International Order of Red Men bought the lot and made plans to erect a large brick building. Mr. Howard planned to build a new store on the adjoining lot, over which the Red Men would extend their wigwam or lodge rooms. The newspaper commented that the building was the latest and most convenient plan and will doubtless be one of the finest in Southern Oregon. But these plans were never carried out. I mean, can anyone make sense of this stuff? Like, what's going on here? No one knows anything. They're coming and going. Brick, no brick. Yes, no, I own it. You own it. The shoe shop, not a shoe shop. It's like that story, you know, that anecdote about Neil Cassidy when he gets pulled over for having a long revoked license, and he starts pulling his ID out of his pocket, and instead he pulls out a whole handful of coins, and he's talking the whole time, and he's running around in circles, just picking up all his change, and his circle is getting wider and wider, and eventually he just sort of like runs off. And the cops just sort of so overwhelmed by the whole thing. I feel like that's the kind of thing here. Just make the history so dizzying that no one can keep track of it, and then it's just like, okay, well, whatever, you guys just keep doing your thing over there in Jacksonville, you weirdos. This is the Love and Bilger Tin Shop. Significant because, well, it served a number of purposes, I guess. It was rented by the county auditor and probate judge. I don't know. I guess that makes it significant. Mr. Love was particularly prominent among the early settlers in Jacksonville. He was on the board of trustees when the town government was first organized, and the building was maybe made after 1856, probably, because it's not on some lithograph. In January 1859, it was advertised as a fireproof brick building, and they, Love and Bilger, granted Lewis and Solomon Sachs a half interest in the stone and brick wall, being the east wall of our storehouse in California, and a half interest in the ground under the wall. The building is now a bakery. Selling someone half interest in the... Okay. You know, I'm just gonna move on. Strange we haven't even left this one town here. Oregon, you're gonna be a unique one. Probably not the best content here, but you're only as good as your, material. Masonic building here, California and Oregon streets in Jacksonville. Occupies the site of the former El Dorado Saloon, which is a building that stood obviously here. In 1853, when Kinney and Appler sold the house known as the El Dorado to William Burke, who rebuilt the structure 1 year later. The only evidence that he rebuilt it was because he referred to it as the building built by me in this place, known as the El Dorado Saloon, which it wasn't anymore. But it also housed a number of other enterprises as well as the saloon. Shocking. George Shump opened his first barber shop there in 1872. There was a tailor shop there as well. And when the El Dorado burned in 1874, the owner, Patrick McManus, sold the property to the Masonic Lodge. And in 1875, the Masons completed construction of a 2-story brick building on the site. So third or fourth, allegedly, version of this barbershop hole. Just trying to point that out for no reason. There it is, folks. Masons Hall, International Oddfellows, always... Oh, wow, look at that. Just like I planned it, but I didn't plan it. But there it is. I knew it was here. We saw it earlier, but I didn't know it was going to come back here. And it's everywhere. This is the game. It is these guys. Always at the heart of it all. Somehow, some way. I don't know why, but this is the McCully building, even though it says otherwise. And Dr. McCully, as we've heard, was one of the earliest settlers in Jacksonville. He was an important role player in the development of the town, of course, listed as a dairyman, but he was obviously involved in financial and business ventures, including the previously mentioned El Dorado Saloon. He was the only Republican from Jackson County elected to the territorial legislature in the 50s, when pro-slavery Democrats ran in the area. In 1861, him and his wife built a large 2-story frame house in the classical revival style, the most pretentious and stylistically sophisticated structure attempted by local builders up to this date. And in order to raise cash for it, he mortgaged another lot. During the 50s, the lower floor was a storehouse. The second floor was known as McCully's Hall. It was for public and religious meetings and theater performances and social events. And then it was leased to the Lodge Number 10 International Order of Oddfellows, of course. And Mr. McCully was weak financially. 6 months later, all of his stuff got ganked and gaffled, and so he left Jacksonville,
left his wife, son, and daughter behind. Jane, his wife, saved the house as she was operating a school where she taught English and piano and drawing and painting. And she retained the title somehow. She lost her rights eventually when the sheriff, W.H.S. Hyde, sold it at auction, who then sold it again, and then those guys sold it again, and then finally the Lodge of the Oddfellows got it. And Mr. Clapel shows back up again. He occupied the ground floor, and, he ran apparently a hardware store. And Mr. Hoffman's daughter married Mr. Beekman, the banker, so Hoffman and Beekman, also active in the Presbyterian Church Affairs and members of the town's board of trustees. Clapel, again, the German immigrant, was the first recorder and a member of the committee and the county sheriff. And he also ran the hardware business, and he also owned a saloon and a billiard parlor. And remember Mr. Casper Cubley? Well, he makes another appearance. He bought the hardware store and used to advertise that hardware store in the International Order of Oddfellows building. He was from Switzerland. He also owned the production and distribution of meats, breads, and other edibles. But he did become prosperous. He built his own brick building on Commercial Street, the one we looked at earlier. The hell's up with these guys, dude? What is this? Is it just me or is this weird? And they sort of leak it in there. This is the Methodist Episcopal Church on 5th and D Street. You guessed it, in Jacksonville. Mr. Reverend T.S. Royal makes another appearance because he erected this structure. James Cluggage sold them the land, of course. And Horace and Abel Reed make another appearance selling bricks, which may or may not have been for the foundation of the church. Sometimes courthouse, but always church. Insubstantially constructed, like all of the early buildings in Jacksonville, frequent repairs were necessary. According to the Democratic Times newspaper, the roof, floors, and seats were constantly being replaced. They reoriented the church to face on 5th rather than 4th, which involved turning the building around. In the beginning, in 1854, there was no tower or spire. They had to add one in 1854, okay? With a parapet and with pinnacles at the corners, and then the parapet with pinnacles was subsequently removed. In 1888, they did a major restoration, and they stopped holding services here in 1928, a casualty of the economic decline that began in Jacksonville in the 1880s. Well, hubba. What do we got going on with that? All right, I'll move on. Still, I'm thinking about you. I wonder what you're doing right now, Ernest. I wonder what you're doing right now. Probably gathering rust in the back of some peddler's warehouse. This is Neighbor's Jewelry Store in Jacksonville in Jackson County, which is apparently the largest county in all of Oregon. The lot where Neighbor's Jewelry Store now stands used to be owned by different people. The Thompsons sold it to Newber, who evidently intended to erect a new building. In 1874, we know he was judged to be insane and was ordered taken to the state insane asylum, with his guardians paying the cost of keeping him there. Lena Newber, apparently his wife, leased the building to a barber, and the building is now used as an art gallery. Okay. Goodbye, Mr. Newber. Goodbye. This is the Jeremiah Noonan house. That's right. You thought I was going to say church. Sure looks like a church. What an old world banger. Golly. What a beautiful building. I would have guessed it was a church, but I would have guessed Rizong, because it is in fact a house, certainly the largest and most pretentious to be built in Jacksonville, for prominent merchant Jeremiah Noonan, and his wife, of course. Designed by George Barber, who took the plans from a pattern book catalog. Where have we heard that before? The pattern book catalog, by the way, the name was called the Cottage Souvenir. Right, because this is just a cottage. The cost of the construction is unknown. Yeah, it is clearly a monstrosity, and it is clearly beautiful, with some little antiquitacular lanterners there. My lord. That doesn't really look like, what do we got? A dragon here? A dragon eating like a lotus? That's interesting. That fireplace. Hubba. What a cool place. Oh, what I wouldn't give to sit at that piano. Give my last cold beer to sit at that harpsichord, just to play a few notes for Mrs. Noonan. I'd give my last cold beer. No, I wouldn't.
Today's surveying episode was made possible by Domino Pure Cane Sugar. Did you know it's smart to stay slim and trim and get Domino's energy lift too? 6 teaspoons of Domino sugar contain fewer calories than many foods. Domino sugar helps supply the quick food energy you need every day for pep and vitality. Nutritionists say that no single food is fattening unless you take in more calories than your body uses up. Well, make that food be Domino sugar. And this is the Orth Building. It occupies a site which was occupied earlier by the Eagle Brewery and a number of smaller buildings. In 1857 deed for an adjacent parcel refers to the boundary between that lot and Holman's house. And J.J. Holman is identified, due to a lithograph that was published in 1856, as the owner of the Eagle Brewery. But there's some confusion whether or not it's a saloon or a store. Nobody knows, because there was another brewery slotted to be same side of the building, City Brewery. We're told Mr. John North raised the building to erect a new brick structure in 1872. In an article here by the Democratic Times, which says, Mr. John North has commenced to tear down the old City Brewery in order to make room for his immense new brick house. This old house is one of the landmarks of the town. It was built in 1852 and has in times been devoted to almost every purpose except that of printing a newspaper or serving God. It's been there for 20 years, the time of the writing. And even though the land had been for many years occupied by a substantial two-story brewery or salon, James Cluggage retained ownership of it because of the old land claim we talked about. He gave John North a warranty deed for a lot with a 33-foot frontage on Oregon Street. And there's a bunch of the whole usual deeds passing around. And at some point, Orth acquired a half interest in the south wall of Thomas Shavner's brick store, including a right-of-way through the cellar for a drainage ditch. So you can buy interests in random brick walls. Even though the newspaper said he was building a massive brick house, doesn't really seem to be the case. Seems like it's supposed to have a meat market on the ground floor, a hall on the second floor, and they did, allegedly, clear the land, lay the cornerstone, and complete the construction in 6 months. There are attorneys that have offices on the second floor, there's a barber, there's a wigwam of the Oregon Pocahontas Tribe No. 1 International Order of Red Men, and all that sort of stuff. Thought they already had a building. Man. This town is started out as a peaceful stroll and has devolved into a bunch of confusion. Maybe I'm just a little derpy today. I don't know. I mean, I read through all this stuff. I read through all this stuff in advance. It didn't make sense then. I thought it was possible some of it would reveal itself down the road, but doesn't seem to be the case. This is the Thomas G. Reams house, and enlarged in 1880, was built in 1867, and that's essentially all the information we're given, but I will note, if you'll allow, this rather interesting little bit of symbolism there. Now, one can say that that is an iron cross, like a Phoenician sort of thing, but, maybe it's coincidence. But it just looked like the same old kind of world, kind of stuff that we see everywhere. Maybe not. Maybe he just likes the shape, huh? How the hell do I know? I don't know. What I does know is that I does what I likes and I likes what I does. This is the Presbyterian Church on California and 6th Streets in Jacksonville. In Jackson County, as you got a guessed. Now, what we're told is that church trustees in 1878, Mr. Beekman, same guy, and Hoffman, another, same two guys, they bought the lot. They gave James Cluggage, his attorney, same guy, a note for the principal, paid by Beekman, and they cleared away the shanty on the side of the Presbyterian Church. I will say that there's this underlying theme always in these stories where some residence was, or some shanty, or some, tiny unnamed, nondescript, not even worth mentioning, property, is shuffled off frame, knocked aside, and this new thing is built. But these are the first people that came to this area. I mean, who lived there? What sort of shanty are we talking about? Someone's home? And how do you own land and then there's some building on it that you don't know about and it's just a shanty and you knock it down and build? It's not just here, but everywhere, seemingly. All across California for sure. Build a post office, knock down whatever structure was there. Who cares who lived there, what purpose it served, who owned the land? That's not important. Who cares if we're, it's just odd. And it seems to be like they downplay it in the same way that some of these guys downplay the Native Americans. Like, oh, those guys, they're just simpletons. They were just rolling around in loincloths and stuff. They didn't matter. We did it. We did it. I just get the same kind of vibe. Like maybe, most of these buildings were here in some form and they just got to downplay. Like, well, no, that was just a shanty, I don't know. It's just odd. But anyway, this building was erected in between April and July. This building, they built this in April and July 1880. Give me a break. What, 7 months? 3 months? Dude, ridiculous. Anyway, Mr. Beekman purchased a 1,000-pound bell in September. Mr. Beekman assumed personal responsibility for a major share of the expenses. Mr. Banker Beekman. And then, of course, the other 5 guys lived in the town. Casper Kubley pitched in for a stove and a heater, and part of it was paid for by the Board of Church Erection, which a very poorly named association, if I may say so. Reverend Moses Williams is the first guy who came to Jacksonville. Preach here, and he's somewhat described as an aloof person, caught up in the daily activities involved in running a farm, and uninterested in community affairs or ideas. At frequent meetings with other persons, he seldom mentions the content of their discussions, almost as if it were unimportant what was said. Aside from his commentaries and his diaries that we read, from his own house and fields, he makes almost no observations about the outside world and the character of people. Okay, well, gonna read your diary, Mr. Moses Williams, and talk bad on you once you move on, but I guess it's the nature of the game when you are in the public light, huh? It's okay. You can ignore what I say. I'm used to it. I'll keep talking. Nah, I don't care. Kind of a charming little old church here. And this here is the Rogue River Valley Railroad Station. And this is exactly what I surmised it was when I first laid eyes on the old gal. A railroad station. In 1884, the Oregon and California Railroad Station was expanding. This was built in 1891 as part of a local effort to connect Jacksonville to this railroad, but as stated otherwise earlier, it didn't work out. The grade of the rail bed was too steep for the small engines, and so yeah, Central Point, Medford, Ashland, those places all prospered at Jacksonville's expense. So, the one line that went from Jacksonville to Medford was abandoned in 1925, and now, as most railroads like this, it is now a museum, as so often happens. Time after a time after a time again. Some of these stories in America write themselves. I mean, I guess I can't say that. I have read through, was this the 7th or 8th state of, actually completed 7th states. So, I've read thousands of these. And I guess there's bound to be, repeated narratives, but at this point I can almost write them myself. Sometimes. And there's always surprises, but this is P.J. Ryan's first brick store building is what it's called. And I bet you can guess its significance. Although being long and checkered, it's often remodeled, one of the most frequently re-altered buildings in Jacksonville. P.J. Ryan bought the land from Mr. Beekman in 1860, of course. And in the deed, for some reason, the building, it says if you are to build here, it has to be a brick or stone, and it had to extend to the line dividing the property. So Beekman was ensuring himself of a brick wall to which he could attach a building of his own. Okay, now the penny drops, and now I understand why this shared interest, what this means. In downtown areas, when you have those buildings where they share a common wall, I understand now. So Mr. Banker Beekman wants a brick wall so he could then only have to buy the other wall, the other 3 walls, and attach a building of his own. I get it. And Ryan eventually missurveyed his lot and began to build his building with the west wall resting on Beekman's lot. At some point, there was a stone cellar wall built by Frank Krause, who didn't get payment, so he put a mechanics lien on the new brick house. And the original building appears to have been 1 story. I didn't think there was an original building, but I guess there's an insurance policy taken out on a 1-story brick storehouse. Several people renting it there. At one point, there's a store, a harness shop, and then the U.S. Hotel took over. There was a fire in the building in 1874. Ryan rebuilt the store, added a 2nd story and a 3rd story, and nothing's known about this guy, P.J. Ryan, other than he had 1 picture. So I'm sorry to leave it on this picture for so long. That's just 1 picture for all these. But he was one of those active and successful merchants in Jacksonville, and he owned the Palmetto Bowling Saloon, one of the first local establishments of its kind. His story, I'm sure he'll resurface. Mr. P.J. Ryan. Now, first I thought we had seen this church before, but I was wrong. This is St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church on 4th and D Street. The Catholic residents of Jacksonville used to celebrate Mass in the home of Charles Casey, and there were 105 Catholics in the area. So, Mr. James Cluggage sells Archbishop Blanchett the lot. The building was erected the same year, and the design for the church, prepared by Mr. A.M. Barry, were laid out in great detail, and it was dedicated by Archbishop Blanchett in 1858, although construction wasn't done, I guess. Anyway, there was a smallpox epidemic which apparently ravaged the town in 1869, and the sisters showed up to assist in burying the dead. 33 marriages were solemnized that year, to give you an idea of who's in control of the narrative. And eventually the population of the church basically left and went to Medford, along with the trains. And now it's like a mission church, so each Sunday there's a priest that comes to do it. Very cool little building. You gotta have a little representative of the Catholic Church, you gotta have all these little denominations featured. I went to so many different types of churches as a kid, I don't know the difference in any of them. This is the Table Rock, a billiard saloon in Jacksonville in Jackson County. Couldn't guess, and I'm sorry all these have just 1 picture included, really it's kind of lame. I'll leave it on 1 picture for the whole time, but that's how it is. The name Table Rock was associated with several structures that stood on the site, and it's actually the name given to a large volcanic ledge in the river valley, and later the scene of a devastating attack on Indians by the new settlers. So you got your usual C.H. Miller buying the thing, selling it to Caspar Kublai again, who sold it to two other partners. A year later, one of those partners sold his half to Hermann von Helms, who was a German immigrant. They set up a saloon, expanded and rebuilt. 4 years later, they purchased another piece of land from James McCulley, who resurfaces, and they sold it to Bletcher, the butcher, and in their saloon, they kept a cabinet, in quotes, or museum display case, which contains many curiosities not duplicated in any other cabinet on the coast. Table Rock Saloon closed in 1914 when Jackson was well past its prime. The interior was gutted by fire in 1960, leaving only what you see here. Now, that is a fancy facade for a saloon. I'll tell you that right now. That looks old world as hell. It looks like something they'd build for a saloon. What would be the point? I wish we could see more of these buildings, and I wish they weren't so stingy with the photographs. I mean, what is that one little picture from one side view? Kind of weak. This is the United States Hotel. If you couldn't read, I just read it for you. Built in 1878, and of course, stands on the side of a previously framed hotel known as the Robinson House, the Union Hotel, and then the United States Hotel. And John Robinson passing the mortgage around 3 or 4 times, 7 or 8 names. Finally, Mr. Beekman, sometime in 1873, it looks like there was a fire. He failed to meet mortgage payments because he owed Caspar Kublai. And so the sheriff sold the hotel to Mr. Beekman, who promptly resold it to George Holt, the architect. Unbelievable. Same story. In August 1878, the Democratic Times reports that Holtz was firing bricks to construct the walls of the new hotel he's building. I mean, all this is just starting to be ridiculous. The Redmen were the first to use the building. When President Rutherford B. Hayes stopped in Jacksonville on his tour from San Francisco in 1880, apparently he stayed here. I mean, what is the deal with that? The president came to Jacksonville, and now it's basically the United National Bank of Oregon. I just don't understand. You know what I'm going to say. I don't understand these stories. It's like the same 5 people doing everything. This can't be real. You know, I thought that this was, I thought this place was going to make sense. It doesn't make any sense. How? How is it so ridiculous? 5 people just buying and selling every bit of property in this entire area. What is the deal with this? This turned into being actually one of the more convoluted and ridiculous stories. Every building has a tie into the same guys. It makes no sense. This is the Orth House. Again, a different Orth House on Main and 3rd Street. Okay, a different one. Built in 1880 and definitely overgrown. I added that part myself. A cool old house. Looks kind of abandoned though. I wonder if we're ever going to get out of Jacksonville, or is this survey just forever? Forever Jackson. I suppose it remains to be seen. This is the Max Miller House on East California Street in Jacksonville, in Jackson County. And, well, we're told next to nothing. It was built in 1888. That's basically it. And this is the Hanley House in Jacksonville, in Jackson County, of which we are given virtually no information about. I'm sure you weren't very surprised by that, other than it was built in 1872. And a lot of these buildings, 1872, these are old homes, you know, 150 years old. I mean, 100 years old at the time of the survey, from the time of the survey, you know. It's very interesting how many of them survived. It really is kind of a time capsule in a lot of ways. I don't know if it's still like this. Maybe. And I just got booted off. Well, I'll stop it there for now as we make our way out of Jacksonville. I don't know, mixed feelings about this one. A lot of the same characters resurface, you know, just very odd and really kind of low on the visual quality. You know, there's some cool properties in there, but we didn't really get to see too much of them. So I hope things pick up a little bit more. This one's a little bit of a letdown for me. I was looking forward to, but you know, we are young. We have far to go. So don't let my somewhat defeated spirit be contagious. You know, I haven't been posting very often lately. I'm in the process of fixing and selling a house, my house, first house I ever bought. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I just haven't had time to do it, but I am gonna make it up. You know, eventually when I settle into wherever I end up going, I'm gonna be cranking out material like it's hotcakes. So thanks for your patience, and I'll see you soon.